Okay, so now we're going to start recording. My name is Adrienne Martinez. I do qualitative research at UCLA. I'm a doctoral candidate, which means this is my 4th year there. And I've done a lot of qualitative studies, usually with Latino individuals. But I had just worked with one of Dr. Garcia's colleagues, and so he recommended that I talk with her about this fantastic upcoming conference that you guys are having. And so I wanted to just meet with you, kind of go over what to expect that day, get you used to the whole process of being a note taker or a facilitator, answer any questions you might have. And so there is no way to be fantastic at this in 1 or 3 or 5 trainings. This is something that you have to learn about and then just kind of get in there and experience it and do your best. We're not expecting anybody to be perfect at this, and really just kind of understanding your authentic self is the way that you're going to do the best here. So it's low pressure, but a very important thing that we're doing. And so what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to share my screen so you'll be able to see my screen. And you should be able to see pictures of you. Can you also see pictures of you a little bit? You guys have you on the side? Okay. So I'm going to start off with the slideshow, and we have some kind of fun things that we're doing. And I'm going to shrink this down so that I can still see you, but actually make it big enough so that everyone can see. So everybody's here for focus group note taking, right? How many facilitators do we have? Raise your hand if you're a facilitator. Okay, we've got 1. And then everybody else is doing notes? Yeah? Okay, perfect. I think it's important to understand both jobs so that you know how to help each other kind of in the moment, because once we're there, and the people are all around us and the questions are coming. And so the person that you're working with is really your biggest ally in the moment. So it's important for us to kind of get like, what do we expect of each other? All right. So now we're going to do our cold practice. And this is kind of crazy. And as I said, nobody's going to be perfect at this. So we're going to watch this video that I like to call Insider Talk. And this is just a general idea of how are you at note taking? If I was to just drop you cold in somewhere and you were to just start taking notes on what people were saying, how would that work? So we're going to watch this video. And basically, as soon as I press play, you're just going to listen and try to think about what's important to you and go ahead and get it down. And then afterwards, we're going to talk about it. All right, here we go.
Because recreational marijuana just became legal. Yeah. And some say it could make billions of dollars a year for the state. And that would be great because the state could really use some money.
So maybe you will go visit your family over there.
Well, you know, I tell you, I'm not a smoker, but this is for folks who have been waiting a very long time, fighting for this, who don't drink, who are not necessarily into other stuff, but find that this is what helps them get through the night. So it's interesting.
When I lived in LA, everyone I know that was doing this had like a medical card when they were like, my toe hurts. And I'm glad that people are now being honest. It's okay if you want to smoke a little pot at the end of the night, but all the people that I knew that had the medical card,
I just want them to legalize something that doesn't give me the munchies. Not all of it does that. Depends on what you use.
Well, not all of it does that.
Yeah.
I
need one more excuse to have Cheetos.
64% of Americans support legalizing it, by the way. It's now the majority. Just saying.
Yeah, you know, it's when I was a prosecutor, we were always told that it's a gateway drug, and we put many people in jail for that. Many people, and I enforced the law, so I did it as well. So I wonder now that the pendulum has swung, and you're saying 64% of Americans, what are they going to do? Are they going to let the people that are serving long prison terms for marijuana trafficking out of jail?
One of the things that seems to be happening, there are. Well, no, even if you were carrying and you got busted.
Yeah, but
what happens, what is starting to happen now is state by state, people are looking at who's been in jail, why they were put in jail, and they're doing all kinds of stuff. But, you know, just a note before we go on this gateway idea. Anything, if you're an addictive personality, if you're an overindulger, everything is a gateway drug. True. Sex is a gateway drug. Chocolate is a gateway drug. All of that, you know. So
I find that I am addicted
to Scrabble. Seriously.
Yeah. No,
I'm addicted to Scrabble on my iPad.
You are.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Yeah.
With friend person.
Yeah. I don't play with any.
All right. So that was kind of a lot. Go ahead and unmute yourselves right now so that we can kind of hear our authentic responses. So, what did you think? Was it hard? No, you feel like you got some pretty good notes?
I feel like I tried to pull out like what the key arguments were on each side and like sort of what people were using as their evidence for each side, as opposed to like trying to write each individual word down.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like I got like the key points that everyone said that way.
That's great. Yeah, I like to use this video, one, because it's a vaguely uncomfortable topic for some people. There's much more uncomfortable topics that may actually come up. But I thought this was interesting because the different people there all had kind of their own perspective. And if you knew them at all, that might kind of influence what you thought about what they were saying. What did Whoopi think about marijuana being legalized? And it's okay if the answer is like, I have no idea, because it did move fast.
I mean, it sounded like Whoopi was pretty much for it.
It sounded like she supported it.
Yeah. It sounded like she did, right? It kind of sounded like she maybe saw it a little bit as a disease, as an illness. She eventually got to that, but we knew that she started it off and she sounded kind of positive. What did the blonde girl think about it?
She's happy people are open about their true motivation for smoking marijuana versus giving a fake clinical diagnosis for it.
Yeah, that's a very non-judgmental way of saying that. That might be the best response I've ever heard to that particular question. But I do think that generally people look at her and they see her as being somebody who doesn't really believe that it's medicinal, that like people were lying to kind of be able to give themselves a reason for using it. But yeah, what you said is actually technically probably more true, right? So she seems like she's comfortable and she is willing to support anything that allows people to be more honest, right? What did Kamala Harris say? Do you guys know who she is? So she is a defense attorney, but she's politically marked to really be somebody pretty big in some of the next elections. So she has a lot at stake. And what was her angle on it?
I guess she took more of like the legal angle, which maybe fits in with her background, but more of like, okay, well, now that we have this, looking at it from like the legal system, how does that play in? And I don't know if she really had an opinion necessarily one way or the other, but sort of just like getting people to think through, how does that work for people who have been arrested for this in the past?
Yeah. I mean, I think she was being very careful because she is an African-American woman. And the reality of the issue is that people of color have been disproportionately arrested and prosecuted for low-level drug crimes. And she knows it. And she knows that she's been a part of that system, right? But she was very political in how she answered. And if you were just an observer, you could see her being kind of neutral. But if we know her as a figure, we know that there's probably a lot more. And potentially if she wasn't on The View, then maybe she would actually kind of lay it down and tell us what she really thinks. But we got a little glimmer of the fact that there might be something there. Like, well, it'd be interesting to see how they're going to look at it, right? And then what did Joy Behar think about the issue? She was the woman in the middle with the Scrabble. No? You guys, it's Friday afternoon.
I don't remember which one she said.
She basically just said, like, I think anything's addictive. I'm addicted to Scrabble. I think that there are a lot of women at that particular table who have long reputations. And right now, every single thing that they say is going to potentially affect their future, either in the media, in entertainment, or in some bigger realm. So it sounded to me like a whole lot of not very much, kind of like a little bit of kind of little bits of opinion, but nobody said, I feel like there's been a disproportionate, arresting and prosecution of people of color. And if they're gonna legalize this, then there better be some mechanism for making sure that we get justice for those people, right? Nobody said that, even though potentially that's something that was being kind of bandied in there. So the reason I like to do this insider talk, and we usually have a bigger group, so we often have people who will say, I literally didn't catch any of it. They were talking too fast. All I got was that it was about marijuana somehow. And that's really the reality of what it's going to be like sometimes when you have a whole table full of people talking and you're there just trying to get the notes. So kind of segueing from that, we're going to go through the basics right now of what it means to be a note taker. And we'll kind of touch on being facilitators also. If you have any questions, feel free to throw them in. It's absolutely okay to interrupt. But I doubt I'm going to be teaching you very much that you don't actually kind of just intuitively know about having conversations and just listening to people, because being a note taker is kind of the same way that we go into new relationships with people, where we're listening to not just what they actually say, but we're kind of paying attention to how they come off and what they're not saying, so that we know how to make a record of it. So probably the most important thing is that note-taking is the responsibility of the note taker. And the reason we say that is because as a facilitator, you may feel like something was said that's just golden. You're like, oh, that's the best statement. It really captures everything we're thinking about. But you have to trust your note taker. Let them be in charge of taking notes. You be in charge of running the groups. And the only communication that the facilitator should have to the note taker should come from the note taker. So if you're the facilitator, even if you're tempted, you want to act like the note taker's not really there. You're here having a conversation, facilitating this conversation with the people, and the note taker is part of the furniture. They're just there kind of keeping track of things. They're an important piece of furniture, but you don't want to let your relationship with them kind of distract from what's going on. When you're taking notes, the reason that you have to be very clear and very consistent is because sometimes we're looking at these notes weeks after this conference. So we're going to take all of this data that you've given us and, whatever, go on vacation, go to Vegas, come back, do all this stuff. And if there's a single word that says like the dialogue, in quotes, the dialogue, we'll look at that and be like, oh man, what does that even mean? In the moment, it may have been really important to me. So we got to make sure that whatever it is that we say is kind of capturing that piece that you feel is important enough to write down. So how thorough should the notes be? So we're going to actually talk about some hints on specifically how you write things, exactly what forms we're going to be using. But in general, if we wanted them to be perfect, we would actually be doing audio recordings of this, right? And when you do an audio recording, what's really great is that you get the actual words of everybody and you have time to go back and review it. But what's not great about audio recording is that just like these women on The View, you have an audience and you know you have an audience. You know that you're being recorded and watched and listened to. And it makes you kind of restrict how you feel about stuff, because later on you can't be like, oh no, that wasn't me. I didn't say that, because we have you on film or like on tape. Here people feel like they can kind of say their thing and it floats off into the air and we're able to kind of interpret it in the moment. And that's really important. What demographic information should be recorded. So we're going to talk about that as we move on, because I know part of the intro that we're going to do is to ask people about tribal affiliation and things like that. So we'll go into that. But in general, if it's something that you think is really relevant, then you may want to make a note of it. Like I would say that somebody under the age of 15 or somebody over the age of 80 is relevant, right? Because they're going to have a different experience than other people. But in general, we're not going to be actually recording the demographic information of everybody. It's just something that you might want to put, older female said something like that, right? Or you may want to say, these two people were related, things like that. But in general, we're not getting any more specific. Should the note taker track who said specific quotes? So we have a mechanism for kind of looking at this, and we're going to talk to you guys about it. But let's say that we're talking about desserts, and there's 3 people in the room, and one person is all about chocolate ice cream. And in general, the whole group is kind of talking, but this one person talks about chocolate ice cream like 5 times. So every time it's said, you're like, chocolate ice cream, chocolate ice cream, chocolate ice cream. At the end of the day, if we don't know who said what, it's gonna look like every single person in that group mentioned chocolate ice cream because you've got it written down 10 times, right? And so we want to make sure that one particular person's not overrepresented. So if you have something that someone says and you write it down and they say it again, you're going to want to do something like put a little check mark next to it, so that if they keep saying the same thing over and over, it doesn't look like your whole table said it. That one person was just really fixated. And then how should the note taker communicate with the moderator during the session? So we know that it's never going to go moderator to note taker, right? The moderator's not going to try to engage the note taker at all because they got to be in the zone. They're really focused. And we're trying to pretend like they're not necessarily there. But the note taker may end up in a situation where the conversation is like what we just saw in that film, but like times 15. Sometimes, especially when you get in groups of similar people, 3 or 4 people in a group either know each other from before or they have something in common, and they'll start a whole side conversation with themselves that doesn't necessarily include the rest of the group. The note taker should be allowed to kind of reach over and tap the table by where the moderator is. And the moderator should kind of check the note taker. And if it seems like things are going really far off the rails, the moderator can say something like, okay, let's bring it back to the question again. So I want to repeat the question so that we're all on the same page. Something like that will really slow it down so that the note taker has a fighting chance. Because believe me, it's going to be a lot of writing and it's going to go very quickly. And we definitely want you to be able to feel happy with what your final product is, and not like you were kind of being steamrolled by the conversation. So it's really up to the facilitator to, I guess, moderator, to kind of keep an eye on the note taker, but also look for any sort of signals that they may give you. Okay. So really quickly, we're going to go through common concerns, and then we're going to get deep into what are the actual techniques. So what if I get stuck? Have you ever been writing something and you're trying to keep up and you're just kind of like, even if you're doing an assignment, you're trying to write something down and you just kind of like blank. I just got to stop. Does that ever happen to anybody? Yeah. So the main purpose of this project is to get information that exists but has never been shared with the scientific community. We're trying to get people's authentic views and perspectives. If you don't get every last perfect thing, or you're taking notes and all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, I need to just kind of shake it off for a second, it's not going to change the entire project. You're still going to be proud of what you came out with. So if you feel like you get stuck, or if you feel like you want to stop the conversation because something important is said and maybe you missed it, it's okay. It's okay to not kind of get stuck on one thing so that you miss kind of the next 5 minutes of conversation. Again, though, if the note taker is really swamped, you can look at your facilitator or moderator and kind of just give them a look, and they'll say something like, can you repeat that? Now, the facilitator or moderator may miss it completely. The note taker may hear something that is just like genius, but they didn't hear it exactly right. The facilitator or moderator may miss it. That's okay. All you have to do is just kind of make a little note of it. And later on, if you have the chance to clarify, you can do that when we're done. But you basically don't want to disrupt the flow of the conversation, because when people start talking, that's when stuff starts coming out. what if I react emotionally? Did anybody feel emotional about the marijuana legalizing video? Did you feel anything at all about that? No. You can tell that I did, right? Could you tell that I did? So a couple of times I brought up to you like disproportionate incarceration of people of color for stupid low-level like drug offenses. I obviously have some feelings about that, right? This may be very low level compared to how people feel about experiences that they've had in the healthcare community in Los Angeles. I'd like to tell you that everyone is going to say, we just need a little bit better transportation access, or we need later clinic hours. But the reality might be people may say something about being extremely disrespected by people. They may talk about family members who had such a catastrophic level of coverage and care that it actually cost the family member their life, right? So these may be emotional topics. So what if you react emotionally? I mean, I think the reality is that you're a human being is the answer. So you're allowed to react emotionally. And it would be kind of strange if you didn't. But we generally don't want to get over involved with the situation. So if somebody's crying and you start crying, that's okay. But if nobody's crying and something is said that really hurts you because something happened recently that's close to you, it's okay to just excuse yourself. To let the facilitator, moderator know, I need to excuse myself for a second. They can pick up and take some notes for you. You can wave us over, we'll be there. And if you need us to sit in, that would be okay. But it's generally good to allow yourself to react if you need to, but don't lead the emotion. Don't be the one that's kind of pushing it into a space that it's not necessarily going to be. Is silence okay? What do you guys think about that? Oh, sorry, Robin. We're asking, is silence okay?
I think, yeah, I agree with Dr. Kersey. I think that like an appropriate amount of silence can be okay. You just have to sort of like read where people are at. And if people are sitting and processing, you don't want to like disrupt that by jumping in with another question. But you also don't want them to like not say anything for 10 minutes. So
yeah, it's not something that we're generally very comfortable with in like American society, especially in Los Angeles. We like to do a lot of very superficial talking to each other, more so in some communities, less in other communities. So my mom grew up on the reservation in Zuni. And so if you know anything about like the Pueblo groups and how they interact, it's very different than kind of chatty LA culture. I don't know what tribes will be represented, what nations will be represented when we're there, but you may be with people who aren't overly effusive and talkative about things that are actually quite important to them. And it's appropriate to give people some time and space to not only think about it, but also to not really rush them to like hurry up and answer on my schedule, you know? It's complicated because we have a limited amount of time, right? We can't spend like 30 minutes on every person figuring out what they want to say. But sometimes that silence is enough of a pressure to kind of push people who wouldn't normally speak to speak. And sometimes if there's silence, that's meaningful. And so it's okay for us to actually document that. Now that we've kind of gone through this, if we could each kind of come up with a main concern that we have about doing this sort of project or doing any sort of note-taking or any sort of research, which is basically what we're doing here. Do you guys have a main concern? And I guess I'm not going to say, do you have a main concern? What would be your main concern? So we show up the day of, and what are you kind of thinking about the night before and that morning?
I do have a concern. I would say my concern would be a lot of our community members, they're real quiet. Mm-hmm. And if they're asked a question, And if they're, this is based on my experience, if they feel like they're rushed, that'll cause them to shut down. And then that could change the whole entire time that they're there for them to either share or not share. So I think it's important that, like Andrea was saying, that community members are there so that they can see familiar faces to make them feel comfortable. Because if they're going into something like this where they're expected to maybe answer every single time, if they don't have the answers, and that silence can turn into uncomfortable silence for them. And so basically what I'm saying is, my concern would be, if they're like, is there like any icebreakers that during this note taking maybe we can say or something like that to make them come back instead of, like rearing off and not wanting to participate at all?
Yeah, it's a really good point. I really believe in space sharing, and just kind of sitting with people and giving them the time on their own schedule to feel like they want to share. There is a ball of yarn activity. So one person will hold the string at the very beginning, and they'll kind of introduce themselves and answer a few things, including their name. These are not threatening questions. They're very simply like, kind of where you from type things. And that will allow people to at least be introduced, and passing the yarn ball back and forth will create a web, like a woven kind of yarn web between everybody.
Oh, okay.
So, but I hear you. And I have to say, that's actually my main concern too. I've facilitated groups with Latino participants, and culturally very different. One of the biggest problems I have is that the note takers usually can't keep up. People are talking so fast and saying so much because they haven't had access, but they have thoughts about that. In some communities, people really haven't been given the opportunity to think about, like, what if? Like, how would I make this better? What if something was different? And so we may be asking them these questions for the first time. Like, they may never have ever had anybody ask them. And it's hard to expect people to have an answer right off the top of their head. So I think you're right, Robin. I didn't even ask. Is it okay for me to call you Robin? Okay. I think you're right. That's actually my main concern. But we're going to have on the tables little boxes, and there will be paper and pens or pencils. And we're going to encourage people. This is a space for us to share, our ideas about these things. But sharing your idea by writing it down and putting in the box is just as valuable to us. So if at any point you want to write something down, you can keep it with you and put it in the box at the end. So, we've already left the table, or you can do it while we're talking so that you remember. Any input that we get from the community is valuable, because in the absence of anything, every little tiny voice, every little tiny word is just gold for us. And if you look at the scientific literature, none of these voices are there, So yeah, no, I think that's a legit concern. But I think really being cool with space sharing and feeling like it's okay to sit there is really important.
I have a quick question about the design of the focus group. So is there a reason why you guys aren't implementing an anchoring survey before? Because I heard earlier you guys aren't going to be recording demographics.
Did you want to answer this, Dr. Garcia? I don't know if she heard me, or she may be typing. Let's see.
I think she's trying to unmute her mic.
Okay, let's see. There we go.
I guess I can just preface that I think demographics are really important for analysis, but also we're having non-community members participate.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. I actually hadn't thought about doing an anchoring survey at all. So I welcome your suggestions. I think part of it was, I mean, initially when I set out to do this, I thought it was just like, all right, here's the data, let's report it back, but let's see what you guys think about it. But if you think that's something that's important that could help the study, I'm totally ears and all game to hear, to learn from you. So tell us all a little more about that, please.
Yeah. Excuse me for just 1 second.
So with the anchoring survey, I feel like, especially because we're going to have a mix of county representatives, tribal members, community members. I think that'll give you guys a better lens when you're looking back at analyzing the qualitative data to see who's kind of in the room, who's in the group, but especially like the facilitator mentioned, things that we as note takers have to mention, somebody's under 15 years old, if somebody's over 70 years old, those types of things are going to be captured in your demographics. And then also, for our focus groups, we do get a kind of a lay of the land of, how informed are the folks who are attending the group, on the topics that we're discussing. So for instance, we were looking at FDA regulation of tobacco on tribal lands. And so we had an anchoring survey asking, do you know what FDA is? Do you know the Family Tobacco Control Act? Do you know, who regulates tobacco in your community? And, maybe some paralleled questions for healthcare. But I think at minimum, just seeing, the demographics, if they're a tribal member or not, do they go to UAII? I think that might be also important information to know. But I'm not sure. I've never done a focus group or qualitative analysis where we didn't capture those demographics before. I'm just not sure if you guys are going to do analysis. If it's something you kind of wish you would have had after the fact. So that's the only reason why I was curious.
I think that's.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I think those are all excellent points. Since you guys are more expert at qualitative methods than I am, clearly, my question is, if you do want to implement a survey like that, would you suggest implementing it in each small group or at the beginning? Because the other thing too is like I want to keep some anonymity of people, and I don't want them to feel, especially because it's going to be such a small group, I don't want them to feel that they're sort of being subjects again. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I think it's a fine line with our community. So if you guys have any suggestions around that, I'm totally open.
I mean, I think there's two issues. One is that it's probably too late in the game to add some sort of study like that or a survey to IRB. So in order to make this publishable, you'd have to have every question that you give them reviewed and approved. Yeah. The other thing is that if you're doing I'm getting ahead of myself, so thank you everybody for being patient, but in quantitative methodology, you definitely want to have all of these details and demographics. For qualitative, generally, descriptive statistics are important, but if we introduce the topic to these individuals, they may answer with our language because they will have already answered something that says, are you familiar with these services? And even if we say the word access, it can kind of change and skew their answers. I think that's valuable if you're doing thematic analysis or content analysis, which a lot of people do because it's the most time effective. But if you want to do like something that's a little bit more grounded theory, or you're not sure exactly what you want to do with the qualitative data, it's usually good to not give anybody anything, to literally let them walk in cold. Because if you ask me about even where I'm from, it's going to change how I answer because now I'm thinking of myself as a certain thing. So I think limiting it just to tribal status is may be less impactful. But I think you're right. I think for big scale stuff and for content and thematic, definitely you would do that. So, but hey, if this works, maybe we could do like a big, huge grant and then do a much bigger survey. So, right? Okay. So any other main concerns? These are all really good. Any more chats? Okay, cool. So I'm going to move on now, and this is what the template's going to look like. So it is as bare bones and simple as possible. And believe it or not, you're really only asking a couple of questions. So we're going to, that first side that says sample template is the cover sheet. So that's going to be on top of a clipboard. So when you are not actually writing things down as a note taker, that sheet is always going to rest there, so that nobody walking by can just kind of peek and see what was written down, because we want to be as confidential as we can. Everybody there is going to hear about confidentiality, but it'll make them feel more comfortable if you've got that there. And then this next page, this ball of yarn question 1, this is the demographic stuff we're going to have people say when they're holding the ball of yarn. So their name, their tribe, or their county affiliation, right? And then the question, what makes a healthy LA Native community? So that could go any way. That could go lots of different directions. It could have to do with healthcare. It could have to do with education. It could have to do with like their own personal individual health. We have no idea what they're going to say. But that's good, because we don't want to restrict them at all. So the idea is you have 2 columns here. One is for a brief summary or key points. The other column is for specific quotes. So when we're doing qualitative research, we have a thing that we call in vivo quotes. And those are the actual living words that the person said that sometimes perfectly sum it up. So I was doing an interview today, actually, and I asked the person what it was like to live with a chronic illness. And they said, when you're living with a chronic illness, you can't describe it, because you can't really describe pain. There aren't really words for it, right? And I was like, wow, that's beautiful, because people are constantly making this industry around pain. And having somebody say, like, there aren't words for it, is a perfect quote that I want to make sure gets represented in my paper, so that this person's experiences are out there. So if you hear something like that, that's exactly what's going to go in this notable quotes section. So you're going to have a lot more brief summary key points than you are notable quotes. It's okay if you are not able to pull out any specific quotes. Sometimes it happens. When people are just talking off the cuff, they kind of tend to ramble. They're not always like philosophers, but you may get some. And now we're going to go through the types of information. We're kind of moving along, I know, because we're moving a little quickly. Let me know if for some reason you need me to slow down. It seems like everybody kind of has a pretty good sense of what's going on already. But again, the quotes are well-said sentences or phrases that illustrate this point of view. So we were putting name or initials next in my last conference. But if you just have even a symbol, so that you know if it's the same person saying it, that you're not going to write chocolate ice cream 5 times, right? So it looks like everybody said chocolate ice cream. So if you write an exact quote, put it in quotes. So if somebody says howdy, howdy is different than hello. All sorts of stuff comes with that, right? That's a really weak example, but it's true. We might want that information. So you may want to say like Star or AM greeted everyone, shook hands with each person. That's kind of important. We may want to look at something like that. So something that actually happened, or a quote. Again, in this group, Robin was talking about this, we're really going to want to pay attention to the nonverbal cues from participants. There may be some, maybe their nonverbal cue is that they're kind of sitting there and not really wanting to talk. Again, these cues mean different things in different cultures. So we're not making specific assumptions about what their gestures or not talking meant. But everybody may laugh at the same thing, right? Everybody may shut down when somebody brings up a topic. You may want to note that if you can, if you catch it. Don't worry if you don't catch it. The wording and timing of probes. So we're going to have some probes that you're going to have as we move through the conference, and you'll see a list of those things. I can kind of go through them. But it's possible that the moderator / facilitator, being the best they can in the moment, may change some of the wording. And it's important for you to know if they answer a different question than the other groups, because we're comparing across these different focus groups. So let's say for question number 2, which you don't have, somebody is like, in an ideal world, how would health services be provided in LA County, like in the Native community? So maybe the moderator didn't say health services, but they said getting care. In this particular group, they changed the question. It's important for the note taker to note that, because we may get very different answers. And again, this is 2 weeks later. We've all gone to Vegas, been on vacation. We don't remember exactly what was happening. All we know is that this one group had answers that just seemed a little bit different or a little off, and it'll help us understand why. Sometimes when people are talking really fast, you're going to just get some key points and themes, which I think is kind of what Taja was doing for the video, just kind of getting like the main points of what each person said. That's okay. You can even kind of abstract these a little bit. So in this situation, language barriers are often an issue. So if people are saying things that are like, when I call the clinics, nobody understands what I'm saying, nobody speaks my language, and that's a problem. Or I really wish we had materials that were easy for me to understand, that were, because I don't read English very well, and it would be great for me to know this. Or whenever I go to this one clinic, they only have pamphlets in Spanish. I don't know why that's all they have, but that's all they have, and that's a problem. Those are 3 separate things, but as a note taker, you're probably thinking they're all talking about language barriers. And it would be okay for you to just write that down, instead of trying to keep detailed notes on all these different points. And then every time somebody else says something about language barriers, you could just put a little check mark. It'll save you a lot of time and energy. One thing you want to think about is, what are the questions that could have been asked, but in the moment, doing their best, the facilitator or the moderator just kind of couldn't get to it, or couldn't see that those questions, somebody said something, and wouldn't it be great if the next sentence said, tell me about that, but it never happened. So you may want to make a note of that. So let's say somebody says there's no pamphlets in my language. What does that mean? Are there no pamphlets in your language because they're all in Spanish? Or there's no pamphlets in my language because they're in English and I speak a different language, right? It could be a variety of things. So just kind of make a note if you can, so that we remember that the next time we're doing something, and we do a big survey, right? We actually really have everything 100% tested and ready to go. We remember to kind of ask about that and see, what were people feeling and thinking about that topic. And finally, at the end, everybody who participates as a moderator or facilitator or a note taker is going to have a blank sheet where they just get all of their thoughts out. Ideas, hunches, whatever it is that you kind of came to you as you were in the moment, because that's also important. So if, for example, a bunch of people were talking about something, and it made you realize that almost everybody there is the primary caretaker of a teenager. It just happened that that's the way it worked out within your group. And so the majority of the talk was kind of about generational issues between the people who were caretakers and the teenagers. That's obviously going to really change the data that you have for this one group. And it'll be luck of the draw. I don't think the seats are assigned. So you never know. Sometimes that happens. Birds like to flock together. So sometimes things are going to be very influenced by that setup. So you might want to take a little note of it while you're taking your regular notes, just kind of off to the side. But then you really want to expand on this in your final observations or field note section, because it may be something that we need to follow up on that's actually really important. All right. So we have a couple videos here, and I'm going to send you this PowerPoint so that you can actually watch these. The first one is just really not great. This is how you run a focus group into the ground. And this can happen, and it's not the end of the world if it happens, because remember, any data that we get from these individuals, any voices and stories that we get is better than no voices and stories, which is very similar to what we have now, right? But this video may help you kind of avoid some of the traps that are going to exist. And it was specifically created to portray that. So it also gives you some hints about how not to go there. It's a little old, so they're talking about, like, one guy starts talking about a Game of Thrones episode, and then it derails everybody, and they start kind of talking about that. A few other things happen. And then there's another example of what a good focus group would look like, how you would facilitate and moderate it to kind of keep it going. Okay. Are there any questions about the note-taking or the facilitating before we do a little bit of clarification on the qualitative versus quantitative research? You guys feel good?
I guess if like the time comes and we have the opposite problem of, I think I'm more like okay with silence, but when people start talking a lot, especially when people are like your elders, not cutting them off, but like redirecting, I guess, if you have tips on how to best do that.
In this particular population, I would probably really limit that. I would probably let people almost run out of steam, if not run out of steam. And that is going to be awkward a little bit. But if you allow a couple of people to do that, what you're going to gain from that is more trust from everybody sitting there who sees that you have respect for the person that's talking. And it may encourage other people who wouldn't normally have spoken to feel like it's okay to start talking without really knowing what they're going to say. Some people who are more introverted think everything through before it comes out. And then some extroverts think while they're talking. And just giving them the space to kind of run out of steam will give you space for both of them.
Okay.
So, but yeah, definitely only in this population. Let me put that out there. You don't want to do that for any other group, but definitely in this group, that's really going to help you. But again, we'll be kind of walking around. So if you get into a space where you feel like you're not really sure what to do, you can kind of just do this, and we'll just come in and hang out and be a part of what's going on and just kind of see. And if there's anything that maybe we can push along, we're happy to. So it's a good question because, again, it's very different in this group than it is with most qualitative stuff. So anything else? Feel pretty good about it? Yeah. Do we feel confident that anything that we can add to this discourse is a positive? We really want to get that out there because it's really shocking. People often do, their PH me. If you have a PhD, you tend to focus and study the people that are important to you or things that have happened in your life. And so because there's so little diversity among people who get a PhD, the literature just isn't diverse either. So anything that we can add is really valuable. So hold that inside when you miss a really important quote. When you're like, oh no, that was really good and I totally missed it. But that's okay because you'll get the next few that are really good too. So really quickly, just to talk about qualitative and quantitative research. I like to do this because I think if you're trained as a scientist, qualitative can feel a little sticky and uncomfortable at first. And if you're not trained as a scientist, it can feel very personal and it takes a little while to adapt to it. So in general, and I apologize if you know this, you may know this, quantitative is expecting that the world is kind of objectively observable and that you can measure it and you can actually use numbers to measure it, right? And that's something that's very different because in qualitative, we believe that there are versions of reality, so it's very subjective, and we seek to either describe it using words in a narrative form or to kind of try to understand a process or a mechanism, right? So it's very different. But the most important thing is that we only use quantitative research when we feel like we have a good beat on things. We kind of understand connections. So if we know that high blood sugar leads to diabetes, that's a pretty solid connection. We can start doing tests and we can use numbers. That makes sense. But if we're trying to understand why one particular clinic doesn't have any women who attend that clinic, we're not going to be able to use numbers to figure that out. We need to actually ask the women, get their experience, and try to understand from their perspective why nobody's going to this clinic, right? So when we're working with people of color, frankly, of any color, I really feel like until we know people's views and perspectives, it's a little premature to start putting numbers on it. Some things we can measure, but until we actually understand what their experience is, what's important to them, what they value, anytime we set up a quantitative study, we're just kind of pulling stuff out of the air, going like, well, maybe if we gave them CalFresh, or maybe if we gave them bus vouchers, or maybe if we provided after-school tutoring. These are all great ideas, but if they don't apply to the people we're talking about, then it kind of doesn't matter. So anytime we're starting off in these studies, it's really important to get that view, get the voice and the view of these people whose voices and views are just not in the literature right now. So that's the approach that I do when I look at the emotional experience that Latina women over 60 have with diabetes. I care about what it's doing to them in terms of depression and anxiety. And so because that's not very well understood, I interview them and talk about their experience. And then once I've done that, then I can look at something quantitative that looks specifically at like their blood sugar or the number of carbs they eat a day. And this is the last piece that I think is also really important, is that in qualitative, we believe in this co-construction of reality. So you guys have agreed to participate as a facilitator or a note taker, but you are technically part of the study, right? The same way that the participants are part of the study. So in qualitative, we don't really believe that there is this objective reality and we're just trying to discover what it is. We believe that our reality is kind of what we experience, and we create it with other people as we're living. So you being in a place with these participants is going to affect how they answer you, and it's going to affect how they see healthcare. We really believe that we can only see with our own eyes, that we are people with a past and a history, and our reality is based on that past history. So everything that I do, so this is a Roma tomato. I'm sitting at my table right now, my dining room table. When I look at Roma tomatoes, I think they're cheap tomatoes. I can get them cheap, and they're for salsa, right? So other people looking at this are probably not thinking like about salsa and their grandma's salsa and how you have to burn the skins first before you chop them up, right? But that's how I see this tomato. And so it's that sort of kind of cultural interpretation that may be a part of some of the answers that you get, where it's just kind of a natural response. And you're going to have kind of your own natural response. And our being there is going to have an impact on our participants, right? And so I think it's just important to know that and understand that when we talk about indigenizing the data, which you'll see as part of the write-up for Dr. Garcia's study, we're really asking kindly, borrowing perspective and views from our participants, understanding that we're impacting them and we're affecting it, because they may never think about these issues until we bring them up, or they may think about them in the moment in a frustrating way, but not in a very practical kind of or expansive way of like, how can we make this a healthy community, right? But we're borrowing those perspectives and views because they're not in the academic knowledge. And the more we know about the way they're experiencing reality, the more we're able to design future studies that are actually helpful, right? Instead of people in an ivory tower kind of telling people what they need, this is really the people telling us what they think they need. And we're here in this particular project to really value that. So again, don't get stressed if you're not perfect at this. You're literally adding to an empty canvas. And anything that you add is really going to help us have a better view on this subject and going to help with the building of future studies so that we can kind of pick up and go from here. So I believe that is it. I will send you some more resources. There is, I wrote an article that's on LinkedIn that's more about qualitative and quantitative if you're interested. But this lecture by Dr. Curry, she's at Yale, is a fantastic lecture about focus groups. So if you're not sure about the background of focus groups and why we do them and how we do them, or you have any concerns about it at all, she'll really help you out. It's in the form of a TED Talk. It goes right before the TED Talk. The TED Talk itself, that's the last one there, is actually animated and super fun. So if you don't want to sit and watch Dr. Curry for like a half an hour, you just want to watch like a quick TED Talk, watch the cartoon one, and that should be fine. So I think that we are done with that. So I'm going to stop sharing, but I do want to just check in really quick and see, was that training what you expected?
Yeah, I think it was really helpful. I think that it's a little more formal and instructive than other focus groups that I've been in. So I think the points that you highlighted are really nice and insightful, especially when you guys do the analysis later down the road. I think it gives us all good points to think about as the focus groups happen. But I also liked, the comments like from Robin and stuff like that, the insights of anticipating how our community is going to react, and kind of as note takers, how do we take that in, and also your perspective too, and talking about, how publicists might be a little more reserved, but, maybe Navajos aren't. Just kidding. But yeah.
Right?
I think it's very insightful. So thank you for that.
Oh, my pleasure. You don't have to like compliment me. I wasn't fishing for, but I appreciate you saying that. But I feel like, unfortunately, because we don't often have diverse higher education, we're not always exposed to how to do qualitative research. And literally you all are the people who know best. Right. And so, now I'm really excited about what you guys are going to come up with, because I feel like it's wonderful to hear it. It's wonderful to be there. And it's wonderful to know that you're processing information in a way that literally no one else can. And that's super valuable. So let me know if you want to, I'm not sure where you are. You obviously seem very, you have high exposure and you sound connected, but if you ever want to do any qualitative work, I always have a lot of little projects going on, and we do it as a collective. And this is for anybody, if anyone wants to join up. We do it specifically to give students of color exposure to research, so that when they apply to college and they're up against, 100 people with straight A's and stuff, it gives them that little competitive edge to get in, because these voices are really important, And so, anybody else? You guys feeling comfortable? Any questions about anything? You feel like you can just like hit the road and start running?
I just wanted to add that, wait, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. I just wanted to add, I liked how you said indigenize the data, and how us being there will affect everybody there. I really like that, because me and another community member, we helped with this survey, helped promote it for Andrea. And so I'm hoping to see a lot of communities that I pushed a survey to, hope to see them there. And I completely agree with you. I think by them seeing, me there and the other person there, that this happened so long ago, I think that's a big deal. Like, it wasn't just another survey just for any type of data like this. There was a specific reason for it.
Yeah.
And to see Dr. Andrea there, myself, and the other community member who's going to be there, I really, really think that's a big deal for our community. I think it's more about, in the census, the term goes around about trusted community members and trusted faces. That's a big deal these days. Yeah. It really is, because there's a lot of our community members out there that are having a lot of negative impact in their lives, whether it's jobs or healthcare, all that kind of stuff. For something like this to come into a setting where they have someone that they already know, I think will help them answer these questions a lot more. So I'm really happy that you guys already put that on the forms and stuff. So.
No, I think that's probably the most valuable part of this. Have you heard about liberation medicine, liberation science?
No.
That's totally what this is. That is, we're here for the political agenda, which is really uplifting communities. And it doesn't feel radical when you're doing it, right? We're not necessarily out marching, but this is radical stuff. It's the reason I wanted to be involved. This kind of stuff can have a huge impact individually and really change the system. So it's fantastic. And I think that you're going to be surprised how many people approach you and are, want to talk to you about this, because they get to see you again. So, yeah, that's good. Anything else? I see Shannon joined us. Hi. Oh, there's no mic, but that's okay. I see the wave. That's good. So I'm around. I'm going to be doing a kind of makeup session. We're going to stop filming in a second, but we had a few people who couldn't join us, so we'll be showing them the video. And I'm basically available. If you have any questions or concerns, I'm going to tell you right now that you're going to do great, so it'll be fine. But if you still want to talk about it, or if you want to hear about any of the projects I have going on, or you're looking for ways to get involved, especially if you're thinking about applying to your next level of school and you want people who can like read your CV and help you with, essays and stuff like that. I have lots of people I could connect you with, and it's part of our kind of liberation medicine push is to really get us out there. So. Yay.
I turned my mic on. Good evening, everyone. Sorry.
Hello.
I'm sorry. I was trying to use the phone and it didn't work. But I'm gonna look at the notes, and I'm really excited to join the team. So I look forward to working with everybody.
Thank you for coming on. I will send you the video so you can kind of watch what we went through. But yeah, at any point, you'll see, I think I have my cell phone number on there. If I don't, I'll add it, but feel free to text me. You can call, but I don't always answer, but I always look at texts. And I'll make sure that you have all of this information in the forms so that you'll walk in the day of just like enjoying the feeling, being like, I'm here, I'm doing something important for the community. I'm here to like help as best I can. And I know exactly what I'm doing, which is a great feeling. So we'll make sure that we get you there.
I'm excited. Thank you.
Oh, thanks. I think that's it. So I'm going to stop sharing, and then everybody have a wonderful weekend and be safe. And yeah, let me know if you need anything at all.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay.